So, to get into the annex, which I think is the most fascinating and compelling thing that we all took away from the day, it was very clear that was presenting a completely different message to what was on the rest of the site. Well, completely might be somewhat strong, but certainly it was a departure. So, and we talked a lot about that after we left the site. Can we remember some of those conversations? Anybody want to dive in with that? I thought, Daniel, what do you remember from?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is what I had read, what Zhang Wan, for example, had wrote about the framing of the whole narrative that apparently also went into the construction of this particular annex, that we've really moved on, or they're trying to move on from this so-called century of humiliation that China had found itself in, being humiliated by external powers from the Opium Wars to indeed the Japanese at Nanjing and in the Second World War during the invasion of China more generally, to becoming a victor, coming out of the war victoriously and also moving towards better times, really, not only domestically but also on a global stage. And I think that this particular message, the annex, really tried to drive home very potently.
But still for a domestic audience, which was your sense of strong sense of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting you should mention the Opium Wars and all of that. I mean, Nanjing, of course, was where the Opium War ended, in the sense that the Treaty of Nanjing was signed, and we didn't visit the museum to that, which in fact, of course, is a lot of it. That is about the century of humiliation, and it now ends with an exhibition about the recovery of Hong Kong.
Right.
So that's all sort of done and dusted. But as you say, the recent trend has been to some extent downplay the relentless focus on victimhood and increase the emphasis on China's victory and China's contribution to victory, not just over Japan but over global fascism in general.
Exactly.
And that's a very key theme of this exhibition.
So that's what you're seeing in those slides, that accompanying this talk, or this conversation, that you can see that very strong, that alliance with the anti-fascist movement. So Japan is lumped in with Nazi Germany, with fascist Italy, in a way that's somewhat seamless in the space where you literally move between photographs.
But I think that is also for an international audience as well, in the way, the amount of effort that was put into the panels and the display. But certainly the number of people we saw there was obviously, it was a domestic.
And the English that's there throughout the exhibition.
Precisely. So it's accessible not only to a Chinese audience, but also to a more international audience.
But I just wanted to say something which fascinated me. Sorry, I'd just quickly say that I always felt with the old and the way the efforts of the director Zhu Changshan, that it was reflective of a China wanting to connect up. Like the Beijing Olympics. Here we are. By the time we get in this new annex, China is global. China is internationalism. It's an economic powerhouse.
Yes.
It made the modern world, and there's a confidence and a bombastic nature, bombasticism.
And you're right that yes, there is an intention to address an audience beyond China, but there's also and I think this is more important, a desire to impress upon the Chinese visitors that we are addressing this global audience, and that the global audience is taking note, and they're taking note because China, now as in the past,
I think
was a global player.
I think it's a projection of internationalism for a domestic audience as much as anything. I think that's what's going on, which was what I was thinking as you were saying earlier. So I think that where would this be marketed? Where would it be? Yes, it's for the international visitor who comes to the city, but ostensibly, I think it would still be for a domestic audience.
Well, what I mean in a sense also is that that domestic audience is so internationalised now. So the level, even the quality of the displays, and it's matching that. It's attempting to match that kind of impact.
But as we've talked about in other talks, particularly ones we did in Japan, there's this. Competition might be overplaying it, but that need to express numbers, a sense of devastation and atrocity that is very clearly going on there, that also internationalises the site as well. So for the domestic audiences who might now be, because they've been students in the UK or Australia, they might have had these in university courses and these types of global histories and World War II histories, they're able to make these connections in a way they probably weren't able to 20 years ago.
Sorry. That's certainly true of, undoubtedly true of some visitors, but I mean, if you remember, we visited the site on a Sunday, and in fact, I visited it again on a Sunday a month ago, which is probably the busiest day of the week for a site like that. And actually, most of the visitors don't come across as terribly cosmopolitan.
No, I'm sure that's true.
Particularly well educated. There are families coming through. There are sort of elderly or middle-aged people coming through, extended families going through. And it's become a sort of day out for the people of.
So that's interesting in the sense that obviously this was a history of shame, and now to invest so much money into that rather than just burying it as part of the past that nobody wants to talk about, this is an explicit recognition. I mean, any thoughts on why that is the agenda now?
Well, it seems pretty clear who's at the centre.
Because what they're doing about Chinese nationalism today,
well, to a certain extent, it's a re-legitimization exercise for the CCP as well, because it remains pretty clear, even though the old revolutionary narrative that we're familiar with from the past is gone, the colour scheme and the actors in focus still very much convey the idea that the CCP is the major actor, not only in the past during the war, who brought about victory, but also in the present, who will bring China ever forward. And this is exactly the idea that the visitor will be walking away with.
Chiang Kai-shek is about that big.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, which is interesting, because until quite recently the trend was for the war in China increasingly to be represented as a struggle of the whole Chinese people.
Right.
And for that to mean a greater recognition of the contribution of the Kuomintang to the struggle against Japan. And now in this new annex and in other recent or recently renovated exhibitions to do with the war, the role of the Kuomintang, I think, was once again being sort of very much downplayed. The Communist Party is to the fore. And I think what we're seeing in that exhibition, as in other similar ones, is a convergence
solidification of that.
Well, yes, and a convergence of two trends that have been going on in China in recent years. You mentioned dark tourism. The other one is red tourism. Which of course was originally associated with Xi Jinping's old friend Bo Xilai, but interestingly has been sort of appropriated by the Xi Jinping regime since 2012. So you've got dark tourism, red tourism, but also tourism in general. Now 20 years ago in China, the traffic through sites like this was minimal.
Yeah, that's right.
As a foreign tourist, you would go around town and visit sites like this, and really, even though the museums were often huge, the number of people there was tiny. But now, with transport around China having become much more convenient, the infrastructure having developed, and people becoming more prosperous, the sort of numbers of people going to sites like this, as we witnessed, is absolutely huge.